Hello everyone. If you love touching animal stories and want to follow the inspiring journey of these adorable friends, don't forget to hit the subscribe button now so you won't miss any of our videos. Now, let's dive into today's emotional story. Jason Miller had always believed that life was made up of ordinary moments. Morning coffee, walks in the park, the comforting sound of his golden retriever's tail thumping against the hardwood floor. For years, his dog, Max, had been his closest companion. Adopted from a shelter at 6 months old, Max grew into a powerful, joyful dog with soulful brown eyes and an uncanny ability to sense Jason's emotions. It was on a crisp October morning, with golden leaves dancing in the wind, that the ordinary turned unforgettable. Jason and Max were walking their usual path along the quiet road behind their neighborhood. Jason, lost in thought about a project deadline, didn't notice the SUV barreling down the street at breakneck speed until it was nearly too late. Max did. In a blur of fur and instinct, Max lunged at his owner, slamming his body into Jason's side with all of his strength. Jason stumbled backward, falling hard onto the grass. The SUV roared past, missing Jason by inches, but not Max. The sound of the impact would haunt Jason forever, a sickening thud, a sharp yelp, and then silence. The SUV didn't stop. Jason scrambled to his feet, heart pounding, and ran to Max. The dog lay crumpled on the pavement, his sides rising in shallow, rapid breaths. Blood pooled beneath his hind legs. His eyes, dimming, still searched for Jason's face. Max, no, stay with me, buddy, Jason choked out, gathering the dog in his arms. His hands trembled as he dialed the nearest animal hospital, voice cracking with desperation. Please, help me, my dog, he's been hit. He saved my life. At the emergency vet, time slowed. Max was rushed into surgery. The vet, Dr. Keaton, was gentle but grim. His spine is fractured, multiple breaks. His lungs are bruised, and his lower body is completely unresponsive. We can keep him alive through surgery, but his chances of walking again are very slim. And there's a high risk of complications. Jason's vision blurred. He thought of Max's wagging tail, the way he waited by the door every evening, the way he curled at his feet when Jason was sick. Do it, he whispered. Do whatever it takes. I owe him my life. The surgery lasted nearly 5 hours. Jason didn't leave the waiting room once. His wife, Elena, arrived after rushing from work, her face pale as she saw her husband slumped on the hospital bench. When Dr. Keaton returned, there was both relief and sorrow in his eyes. He made it through, the vet said, but he's paralyzed. From the neck down, he has only partial movement. Jason exhaled slowly, then nodded. He's alive, that's what matters. That night, when they were finally allowed to see Max, the dog was resting under warm blankets, a breathing tube helping him recover. Jason kneeled beside the bed, his fingers stroking Max's soft ears. The dog couldn't move, but he blinked, slowly, deliberately, and let out a low, soft sound of recognition. Elena knelt beside her husband. We'll take care of him, she whispered, whatever it takes. The days that followed were filled with grief and fear, but also with fierce determination. Jason brought Max home, set up a medical space in the living room, and began what would become the greatest act of love he'd ever given. He learned to feed Max by hand, patiently waiting for him to turn his head when he was full. He gave water through a syringe, cleaned the bedding every few hours, and massaged Max's limbs to keep blood flowing. When Max whined, Jason knew whether it meant discomfort, hunger, or the need to relieve himself. He gently rubbed Max's stomach to help. Every day was exhausting, every night short. But Jason never stopped, and Max, though he could no longer run, never gave up either. In the quiet of the early mornings, Jason would sing to Max lullabies he remembered from childhood. And though the dog couldn't wag his tail, there was peace in his eyes as sleep finally took him. They had no idea then that this was only the beginning of a long journey, one that would test their hope, their patience, and their unbreakable bond. The first few weeks after Max's accident were the hardest of Jason's life. Each morning began before sunrise. Jason would wake, groggy from only a few hours of sleep, and immediately check on Max, who lay motionless on a thick mat beside the fireplace. The dog's breathing was steady, but his body was still, except for slight turns of his head. That was all Max had left. Jason became a full-time caretaker. Every movement had meaning. When Max turned his head away from food, it meant he was full. When he whined softly, Jason could tell if it was discomfort, hunger, or a need to be repositioned. Over time, they developed a silent language, one that only deepened the bond between them. "I got you, buddy," Jason would whisper each day as he massaged Max's legs, moving them gently in circular motions to promote blood flow. The massages took an hour at a time, sometimes longer, but Jason never rushed. He believed that if Max had risked his life for him, the least he could do was give everything in return. Elena watched it all quietly. She worried for her husband, who was now working from home part-time and sleeping only a few hours each night. Yet she understood. The dog had not only saved Jason's life, he was part of their family. One evening, as Jason fell asleep in the armchair beside Max, Elena gently draped a blanket over his shoulders, kissed his head, and whispered, "You're doing more than most people would ever do." When Max's vet, Dr. Keaton, came by for a home visit, he was shocked to see how well Max was holding on. "He should have given up by now," the vet murmured. "Most dogs with this level of injury, they shut down. But he's still alert. He's still trying." Jason nodded. "So am I," and then it happened. One afternoon, while Jason was massaging Max's hind legs, he felt something. It was subtle, a twitch, a muscle contraction that hadn't been there before. Jason froze, his hands still. "Elena," he called, "come here, I think." "I think he moved." She rushed over, and together they repeated the process. And again, a twitch, this time, clearer, real. Jason's eyes welled up with tears. "You're fighting, aren't you, boy? You're still in there." That evening, Jason documented the movement in a small journal he had started keeping. He titled it Max's Comeback. Encouraged, they ordered a custom-built wheelchair for Max. It arrived 2 weeks later, a lightweight aluminum frame with padded harnesses and wheels designed for mobility on sidewalks and grass. At first, Max was too weak to use it, but Jason persisted. Every day, he would lift Max into the harness, help him adjust, and gently roll him forward, talking to him with every step. "You're not done," Jason whispered. "We've got miles to go." The couple also sought out alternative therapies. Acupuncture, hydrotherapy, muscle stimulation, anything that might help Max regain some control. And slowly something shifted. Max began to respond more. He could bend his legs slightly. His eyes followed Jason constantly. He began trying to shift himself in bed, tiny, effortful movements that gave Jason renewed hope. When he saw Jason walking toward him, his ears would perk up. The neighbors noticed too. Jason's story had started to spread. A few would stop by, bringing treats for Max or asking to hear about his progress. Some called Jason crazy, others called him heroic. But Jason didn't care about opinions. Every breath Max took, every flicker of improvement, that was the only validation he needed. One sunny Sunday afternoon, Jason and Elena took Max to the park for the first time since the accident. Jason wheeled him through the open field, letting him feel the breeze and hear the children laughing in the distance. Max's nose lifted toward the wind. His tail didn't wag, but his eyes sparkled, a look Jason hadn't seen since before the accident. "We're getting there," Jason whispered, kneeling beside him, one step at a time. Max nudged his head into Jason's chest, letting out a soft exhale. No words were needed. They both understood. The road ahead was still long, but now there was something stronger than exhaustion or fear. There was hope. As spring painted the city in shades of green and gold, life at the Parker household began to take on a new rhythm. It was no longer defined by loss or limits, but by progress measured in inches, not miles. Max was no longer the paralyzed dog who lay quietly in the corner. He had become the heartbeat of the home, his spirit undiminished by his injury. Every morning, Jason helped him into his custom wheelchair and wheeled him onto the back porch, where he could listen to birds, watch squirrels chase each other, and feel the sun warming his coat. "He looks brighter," Elena said one morning, handing Jason a coffee. More alive, Jason smiled, brushing a hand over Max's fur. He's got something to live for. What started as faint movements in his hind legs began to turn into deliberate ones. At first, Max could lift his paws just an inch off the mat, then two. By early May, he was able to push against Jason's hand with surprising strength. Not much, but enough to know that feeling was returning. "I think we're witnessing a miracle," Elena whispered one night as Max, nestled in his wheelchair, used his front paws to awkwardly nudge a toy forward across the floor. The next day, Jason took Max to see Dr. Keaton for a follow-up. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted Max onto the table. He didn't want to get his hopes too high. After a long series of tests and gentle prodding, the vet leaned back, astonished. "I'll be honest," he said slowly, flipping through Max's chart. "I've never seen recovery like this, not from this kind of injury." Jason's voice cracked. "You mean he could walk again?" Dr. Keaton nodded. "Not tomorrow, not next week. But the nerves are communicating again. There's real muscle response. With continued therapy, there's every chance Max will regain some, maybe even full, mobility." Jason nearly dropped his phone trying to text Elena the good news. That night, he couldn't stop smiling. He watched Max chew softly on a bone, resting on his favorite blanket, and whispered, "You never gave up. So I never did either." They increased their efforts. After that, Jason adjusted Max's routine to include daily hydrotherapy. The local pet rehabilitation center let them use the facility at a discount after hearing Max's story. In the warm water, Max could move more freely. His legs kicked in slow, wobbly patterns, and Jason cheered him on like a coach at the finish line. They also added lightweight training, tiny sandbags attached to Max's ankles to build strength. Jason would count each repetition like a personal trainer. 1, 2, that's my boy, keep going. At home, Max surprised them even more. One morning, while Jason was making breakfast, he heard a soft scrape behind him. He turned around and saw Max, out of his wheelchair, dragging himself toward the kitchen using his front legs and pushing slightly with his hind ones. Jason dropped the spatula. "Elena, come here, he's doing it." Max collapsed just short of the water bowl, panting, but his tail thumped once against the tile. Elena knelt beside him, eyes wet with joy. "You clever boy." Word spread fast. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers reached out, some just to say they were inspired, others to ask how they could help. A local newspaper ran a short feature, "The Dog Who Refused to Quit." The article shared Max's story, from the day of the accident to his miraculous recovery. Jason received dozens of emails. One stood out. It was from a father whose child had recently been paralyzed in a car accident. "My son watches your videos of Max every day," the man wrote. "He says if Max can try, so can he." Jason choked up reading the message. He printed it and pinned it above Max's bed. "You're not just healing, buddy," he whispered. "You're helping others heal too." As summer approached, Jason set a new goal: to see Max take his first unassisted steps by the end of the season. The odds were steep, but then again, Max had already beaten every one of them so far. By late August, the sun bathed the city in a golden haze, and Max's world had transformed completely. He was no longer just a dog in a wheelchair. He had become a symbol of hope, determination, and unconditional love. Jason kept a whiteboard on the wall, where he tracked Max's progress like a coach monitoring a champion athlete. Each new movement, a paw lift, a muscle twitch, a stronger push, was celebrated with cheers, kisses, and the occasional happy tear. Then, one Sunday morning, something incredible happened. Jason was outside, setting up Max's ramp and wheelchair, when he heard Elena gasp from inside the house. "Jason, come quick," He ran in, heart pounding. Max was standing, not perfectly. His legs wobbled, and he swayed like a baby taking first steps. But he was standing, no harness, no wheelchair. Just his legs, holding him. Jason dropped to his knees. "You're doing it," he whispered, voice thick. "You're really doing it." Max looked up at him with calm, determined eyes, as if to say, "I told you I would." From that day on, Max's recovery accelerated. He began taking short, clumsy steps with help, then a few on his own. Jason and Elena alternated between recording videos and crying happy tears. The entire neighborhood celebrated with them. They organized a small victory walk in the park, a community event to celebrate Max's journey and raise awareness for disabled pets. Children made signs, neighbors brought their dogs, and Max walked the first 15 steps by himself before resting in his wheelchair. A local animal rehab center offered to sponsor Max's ongoing therapy. Volunteers created an online page where Max's journey inspired thousands around the world. But for Jason, none of the public praise mattered as much as the quiet moments, like when Max now stood by the back door, tail wagging, waiting to go out. Or the nights when Max curled up at the foot of their bed, something he hadn't been able to do for over a year. One evening, as the three of them sat watching the sunset, Jason whispered, "You saved my life that day, Max, and every day since then, you've shown me what true strength looks like." Max nuzzled his hand gently, his eyes soft and full of peace. Elena added, "You gave us more than we ever gave you." They sat together in silence, a family shaped not by perfection, but by love and sacrifice. Max never fully returned to the way he was before the accident. He still needed help on bad days. His legs had their limits. But he lived fully, happily, proudly, for many more years. And every step he took was a reminder of a truth far deeper than words, that love, when given selflessly, has the power to heal, and that even a broken body can carry an unbreakable spirit. Message from the story. This story is a profound reminder of the power of love, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty. When Max, the brave dog, threw himself in front of a speeding car to save his owner, he paid a heavy price, losing the use of his legs. But his act of heroism was not the end. It was the beginning of an extraordinary journey. Despite overwhelming odds, Max's owner refused to give up. Through sleepless nights, constant care, and tireless devotion, he became a nurse, a therapist, and a best friend. With each day, they proved that true love does not measure worth by ability, but by the heart that keeps beating, the spirit that keeps fighting. Max's recovery wasn't miraculous, it was earned. Step by step, movement by movement, fueled by patience and hope. Even when progress was slow, even when doubt crept in, they kept going, together. This story reminds us that healing takes time, that sacrifice is the truest form of love, and that the smallest victories are often the most powerful. In a world quick to give up on the weak, Max and his owner showed us that no life is ever too broken to be loved or to love in return.